right, welcome to this episode of the Comics Multiverse. Today, my guest is Ethan Sachs, who you might know from his work at Marvel, I think mainly Star Wars titles. But today we're talking about his work with AWA. I met Ethan at the AWA after party at New York Comic Con this year, and when I found out that he had a book that came out actually Wednesday, I thought it'd be great to have him on. And it's called the Climate Crisis Chronicles. It's part of their impact AWA's Impactful Chronicles series. In 2020, they did one on the COVID Chronicles. But enough about that. Let me bring in Ethan, and we'll find out more about him and this book. Hey, Ethan, how's it going?
Pretty good. Yourself?
The lighting's a little bit better this time that we're conversing, and it's a little less
Yes,
noisy.
that is true.
So how have you been, and how is your how was the rest of your New York con?
It was pretty good. It's very conveniently located for me since I live in New York. The travel time, I could actually walk to the Javits Center, so that was pretty nice. That's always good. I
Nice.
pretty much just do two or three shows a year, so it's Star Wars Celebration, New York Comic Con, and then usually maybe one more show. So I have a soft spot in my heart for the show.
Nice. Before we get to talking about the book, I like to kind of see where my guests were introduced when they were introduced to comics, and if they remember maybe the first book they read or the one that kind of hooked them.
Yeah, I think my very first gateway into comics was as a 4-year old in 1977. That's how old I am. Around the same time that I got into Star Wars, I got into first Flash comics, the Flash
Hmm.
for DC, and I just loved the way he looked. I learned how to read from Flash comics, and then I got into Star Wars and Micronauts afterwards. Um, so that was definitely my sweet spot around that time. And then in the 80s, as I got a little older, I could appreciate it was just such a golden age. Alan Moore and Frank Miller, and I really got into the Daredevil run. X-Men, probably my favorite comic of all time is X-Men's God Loves, Man Kills.
Hmm.
I love that graphic novel so much. So yeah, and basically, I was a journalist for the first 20 years of my career, and I got to cover what they called the Geek Beat for the New York Daily News, and it was just, I mean, it wasn't my full-time job, but it was like a
Yeah.
chunk of it, and so I covered everything from comics to Star Wars to The Walking Dead to Game of Thrones, just a lot of stuff I really liked. So, long story short, I became friends over the years with Joe Quesada, former editor-in-chief at Marvel, and in 2016, for the Daily News, I had interviewed this actor Paul Blake who had played Greedo in the original Star Wars, and we had this whole conversation about who shot first, and so that led. He was just so funny about it, and he said definitively in the script it says Han shoots Alien.
Hmm.
Um, but he was talking about Greedo's myopic eyes and all this kind of stuff, how he could miss. So it just stuck in my head, and I came up with the idea of doing the murder investigation into who shot first. Um, and I ended up pitching it as a spec script. Marvel really loved it. Around the same time, the Daily News was offering buyouts, and I took it. So I had like 7 months pay because I'd been there so long. And so if you're going to do a career change, I stretched that out for 2 years with some side jobs, and so I gave myself 2 years to build some sort of comic career. And my first hit was Old Man Hawkeye, and I guess the rest is kind of history.
Yeah, kind of a tangent. And have you had a chance to listen to I don't know if it's the same universe, but the Sirius XM old or Wastelanders Old Man Hawkeye?
I've listened to some of it, and I think it's
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah,
Yeah, I have to do a deeper dive, but we did a sort of spin-off series from there, and I got to revisit Old Man Hawkeye for
yeah.
this one thread that I left dangling. So it was kind of
And that was where he kind of runs into Daredevil, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
in the at the very last page, a sort of coda, like I made it like a button in a Marvel movie at the end, end credit scene. I had him sort of a year after the events. He's already blind, and he scales up a mountain and finds Matt Murdock as Stick, in this sort of temple, and he wants to train because I wanted to explain, how he went from being completely blind to this blind badass fighter in Old Man Logan because it's like
Mhm.
a 5 year difference. So I always meant to sort of revisit that training, and this series allowed me to sort of wrap that up, which was nice.
Well, let's shift gears to what you just had come out on Wednesday. Yeah, it's I don't know. Time has no meaning anymore, I guess. But it,
That is
it
true.
was it was it was Wednesday. The Climate Crisis Chronicles with AWA, and this is the second type the second type of book that you did with them, correct?
Yeah. We did 2 years ago. We did COVID Chronicles, which so like I have a long history as a journalist, and among other things, I worked part time for NBC News for a long time, and I did science reporting. I did pop culture reporting, obituaries, kind of harder news as well. And around the time, and also by the way, Axel Alonso, who is the CCO of AWA, they had just launched their company literally like the week before everything shut down in
Yeah.
2020 with a book, Resistance, which is about a global pandemic. So it was everything shuts down, the distribution, the presses, everything, and Axel, Axel and I both live in New York. Axel is the one who officially brought me over to Marvel too, so I've known him for a long time, and he reached out to me because he's like, we hear the sirens 24 hours a day, um, and we feel kind of helpless as, these doctors and nurses are putting themselves at risk. Because at the time, New York was the epicenter of the world
Hmm.
in terms of the pandemic. So he wanted to do something to tell real life stories of, real life superheroes in his words. And so started to work, and I, found 12 people around the world and various, a nurse in a Staten Island emergency room, a scientist in Seattle who found the first community transmitted case. Just all these different people, and because I worked at NBC, I put them in touch, and so it ran on NBC News first, and it won a New York Press Club award, which I think also got other people at AWA very excited. And so this one, it's a long way of saying this new one, Climate Crisis Chronicles, is sort of a kind of spiritual sequel, but also like even more ambitious. And NBC wanted to do another one, and AWA wanted to do another one, and I certainly wanted to do another one. And we are very lucky because for both COVID Chronicles and Climate Crisis Chronicles, we have an amazing art team,
Hmm.
Dalibor Talaji and Lee Loveridge, who's the colorist. And it's just Dalibor. I think what makes this series so special is like where he's using a lot of reference photos that I get from the people I talk to and things like that. And so there's a realism, but also you can feel the emotions as they're going through some like incredibly life-changing events and things like that. It's just like it really pulls you in, I think.
Yeah. So, I mean, the stories for both this one and the COVID one are from our real life stories, right? I mean,
Yes.
did so you maybe I understand that you reached out to people, or did you kind of find, certain uh,
So
stories of interest that kind of met the story you wanted to tell, I guess.
yeah, a little bit of both. When COVID Chronicles started, I the first two or three I did were people I either knew or knew of. So, like for example, I have a friend at the New York Daily News, the paper I used to work at, who is a crime reporter. And at the beginning of the pandemic, he sent his family away because he knew he was going to get exposed to it. And he's knocking on doors, um, of people who had just died to talk to their families and stuff like that. Because it was like at that time, it was like the first few, it was the beginning of the
Hmm.
fatalities and all that kind of stuff. And so it was, to me, it was very dramatic. And I knew he'd talk to me. And same thing, I had a friend who was an emergency room doctor up in
Yeah.
Toronto. So once we had that to show other people, so it's not just some weirdo calling or emailing saying, "Hey, will you spend hours talking to me and send me these personal photos?" And you know what I mean? And we're going to put you in a comic. So I realized that that's going to sound very weird. So I needed a couple of examples to
Icebreakers.
show. Exactly. And so after the first book for this one, I didn't know anybody, but it was easier because I had the first one to show.
Hmm.
So I did know that the very first story I wanted to, because basically, climate change is a cause. It's very important to me, and it should be very important to
Hmm.
everybody.
Definitely.
I spent a few years volunteering for the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation, which
Hmm.
no longer exists as that anymore, but that was a environmental group. And my daughter is majoring in it and things like that. So I was like, it was very personal. But the problem with it is, how do you show the grand scale of these changes? And so I wanted to tell, with Dalibor's art, to tell the basically the very human, personal, intimate experiences of people who are right there. So,
Hmm.
for example, I knew the first one I wanted to do was a California firefighter who's fighting wildfires. And I found, thanks to Cal Fire, which was a huge leap of faith for them to cooperate at all. And I needed them to cooperate because no firefighter who's working for them is going to talk to the media without their blessing.
Right.
And we had tons of it's in the book that we included that first script, so you could kind of see how it's done. But we had tons of reference photos from them. So I knew that that's how I wanted to start, to just show like, hey, this guy's been doing this for years and years, and it's getting worse. It's getting drier. The fires are getting bigger. They're getting more frequent. Um, so yeah, and from there, I just did a lot of research. I knew I wanted to include a couple of like sort of Gen Z millennial activists, because I wanted it to end on a kind of hopeful note that people are
Hmm.
doing things. So I found one just in the news. I found one, Disha Ravi, who is arrested by the Indian government for like really dubious charges, for organizing climate strikes in her city. So I just tracked her down. I just things like that. Some of them were organizations like the Red Cross. Others were just people I found online. For the last chapter, we did a French astronaut, Thomas, who was in the International Space Station, and he was photographing like the effects of climate change on Earth. So you see walls of wildfires or giant hurricanes or like flooding, deforestation, all this kind of stuff. And so he got a view. He got that view that we don't see because we're on Earth. So it's hard for us to visualize the scope, but he kind of did it for us.
Hmm.
Um, and then, for like the, melting glaciers and things like that, I just didn't know how to, it's kind of boring visually to show a giant glacier and maybe some melt off or whatever. So we hit on the idea of showing how it's affecting polar bears. And so we talked to a polar bear researcher. Um, a friend of mine who is very involved in extreme heat suggested I talk to Yvonne Aki Sawyer, who's the mayor of Freetown in Sierra Leone in Africa. And extreme heat, even though they're not
Hmm.
causing the emissions that are this like, heating up the region, they have to deal with the effects. So she's very much like looking for practical solutions, like tarps to cover street markets and
Hmm.
planting 1 million trees to stop runoff and to provide shade and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, there were a lot of different. One of the more dramatic ones is in Honduras. There was a community activist, and her region was hit with two back-to-back hurricanes, like 2 weeks apart, catastrophic, and that's like never happened, before. So it's like, and they anticipate that kind of thing will continue to happen. So it's like just finding these. I wanted to make it international. I wanted to make it just, you basically feel this is something that everyone is going to experience or is experiencing.
Now, of the stories included in this in the book, is there one that kind of sticks out uh, for you personally, or kind of has a more personal message that you wanted to tell?
That's a good question. I love them all, so it's sort of hard. I think the firefighter and the mayor are ones that I felt like really encapsulated, some things. Like the mayor showed that politicians can do things, and the firefighter, it was like the most obvious example to me. The one that was the hardest to write just from a physical standpoint, but I thought was very interesting, was the seventh chapter, which is told from three crew members aboard this ship called the Ocean Viking, and they patrol the Mediterranean Sea, and they basically they look for these migrants who are um, trying to go from Libya, the coast of Libya, to Europe to escape various reasons. And it's not all climate change related, but it seems like it's growing as climate change, as droughts are becoming a bigger thing
Hmm.
in Africa. So basically, they're overloading these like rubber boats or these, wooden boats that none are certainly not meant to cross an entire sea, but also like not meant to. It's like overcrowded and all this kind of stuff. So they do these dramatic rescues at sea, and it was a bit of a logical leap, but it seems to bear it because they don't know why everyone who they rescue is leaving, right? Like they don't necessarily can't pin it all to climate change or all to political unrest or things like that. But it just the numbers are growing, and at the same time that drought is also another extreme heat and things like that. So anyway, it just that one was the hardest to write because it was just so many physical things I had to understand about how rescues work and all this kind of stuff. So and then conditions in Africa, um, from various countries that the migrants are coming from. So that was the hardest to write. I don't know. It's not really answering your question. I
No,
think,
no, no. I mean,
yeah, I love them all. Like
yeah.
I purposely went for very different ones so that I could experience, or try to show the experiences of different people.
And both of these two chronicles were kind of are written for the for vertical, correct? I mean, it's not your traditional multiple panel comic book. Is there a was there a challenge writing for these books as opposed to the regular comic books? Because I know they're just I mean there was a lot of and you needed it in like the climate change when a lot of information dumping.
Yeah, yeah, like a lot of exposition. Because basically these are also told from the first person. That's told in their
Hmm.
words, and so besides the interviews, there's a lot of back and forth on emails as I show them versions of the script and things like that. So it's like, is this what you meant when you said this? Did I get this wrong? But I think vertical was important, especially when we first started on the very first one, because there was no printing at that point. We
Hmm.
assumed it would eventually be a trade, but at that point there was no the presses weren't running, and the warehouses, Diamond Warehouse was not operational because the pandemic had just hit.
Yeah.
So we got it up and running on NBC pretty quickly. I think like within a month. So it had to be vertical because it was sort of a scroll, the way a lot of digital
Hmm.
comics are. Um, and but from a writing standpoint, they're pretty much panel by panel. Like you're not. There's just a few cases where you're seeing a sequential, like an act over, because they're
Hmm.
essentially kind of talking about specific memories and things like
Hmm.
that. And so we're not showing as many like as I would in a Star Wars comic.
Right.
Like you're not showing an action scene over multiple panels. Like you're showing there might be two panels which relate to each other directly, and then otherwise it's pretty much talking about memories and things like that. I mean, of different events. So that's a long way of saying like it isn't set up necessarily like a nonfiction or like a fiction, space opera would be. So yeah, but I think the vertical was important at the NBC News level, and then um, it's adapted significantly for the trade in terms of like the size of the panels and stuff like that.
Hmm. And I believe the climate one has a foreword by Al Roker, and the COVID one was Alyssa Milano, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Uh,
And oh, go
uh,
ahead.
oh, no worries. Alyssa, actually, a friend suggested that I reach out to her, and she was very open and enthusiastic about the project because she had a bad case of COVID, and the effects lingered for a long time, and she was very much like, I want to get my experience out there. So she wrote an incredibly moving one. And then Al Roker, one of the many many benefits of being in my case, a distant cousin in the NBC News family is that they he knew about the project, and he's obviously very uh, passionate or engaged about climate change, and so he volunteered to do it, which is amazing. There was an actor actually who was interested, but he did not. I'm not going to mention names, but he did
Yeah.
not ultimately have the time. So it was sort of very close to our deadline. Al stepped up and really helped out. And then the other thing I'm very proud of in the book is in the back. There's a sort of call to action article because I kind of feel like with a problem or the crisis as severe as climate change, often we feel powerless. It's like, what am I going to do? And so that
Right.
it's just like, 8 tips on specific actions you can take. And some of them are, probably a little obvious, but it outlines why and things like that. And it's written by this guy, Terry Tamminen, who's a sort of major figure in the climate change movement, and also my former boss slash mentor at the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation. So.
Now, were there any stories that kind of entertained, including in the book, but didn't have the space, or just I don't want to say
Yes.
didn't fit. I don't want to say didn't fit the narrative, because I think everything that you would be looking to use would fit the narrative of climate change.
Yes, I think if there's one, we both books have 10 chapters, right? There are 10 profiles. The first book there's 12 total people, and this one there's I think 13. So even in this case I actually jammed 2 stories into one chapter, the young activists, because I knew only had 10 chapters,
Hmm.
and they it was a sort of similar theme. But I really wanted to include. There was this Indonesian scientist doing work with sort of at coral reefs in Indonesia. Was a scientist in Indonesia doing work restoring coral reefs, but also had seen the effect of, I guess, the change in oceans on a certain kind of shark species, which would have sort of lesions and stuff on their skin. So you could just tell that the conditions are worsening.
Yeah.
Because I don't one sort of subject I would have liked to have tackled is sort of how it's affecting the oceans, and
Hmm.
we did chapters on koala bears and polar bears, and I kind of feel like sharks would have been good too, just because you can see the effects. So I tried
Well,
to keep
it's also land, it'd be land and water. I mean,
yeah. Yeah, so I just that is one that I would have if I had the 11th chapter, and for COVID, I had talked to a Houston area funeral home director at a time, because remember, this is like we were doing this like pre-vaccine, pre
Mhm.
like and at the time there were people getting sick at funeral homes preparing the bodies of people who had died, and so Houston was a hard hit area. I was trying to nail it down, but we just sort of ran out of time, and another one came up. So I ended up going that route. But yeah, so if I had 5 more, I could easily fill them. If I had 10 more, I
Right.
could easily fill them. They're literally just almost an unlimited source of potential stories out there.
So, are there any more books like this on topics that are planned, or are you just kind of
Nothing. Yeah.
seeing how this one how these do, and then seeing if there are any topics or issues that kind of
Yeah, I mean,
you're
I
inspired
have
to.
I definitely have some ideas. There's also some talks about spinning off this series in a different medium of some
Hmm.
kind. But I mean, it's way early
Yeah.
to know for sure. I think obviously, if this is an incredible success, and not just sales, but like if it's recognized with some awards or things like that, then I think it helps our case to do more of them. I personally, and again, I'm obviously biased, but I think this medium is a powerful tool to tell
Hmm.
journalism because it's essentially, unless you have a video camera on hand in the moment of when some of these things are happening, uh, you can't get that visual, um, input that you can from art, right? Like if I wrote an article, and I've written many, many articles in my time, you're not going to convey the same feeling in a reader than if they can visualize
Right.
most directly like what these people are experiencing. So I feel like it's an alchemy the same way, comics in general is such an amazing medium, is because that marriage of words and images is everything. It just is the best of all worlds. Again, I'm biased, so
No,
take
no,
that take that with a grain of salt,
and
but I'm a
no,
true
and
believer.
that kind of, you know, answers the question I was going to ask next is, how you felt, the comic book medium was for doing stories such as this.
Yeah, I mean, this is unique because if I was writing, say, for the New York Daily News or for NBC News, if I was writing an article, I would do an interview and then I would take it. I would not show the person before it's published because that's sort of an ethical breach. But because we were doing it in their words, it had to be in their words. Like, so there was
Hmm.
so much back and forth and collaboration. So, like, by the end of it, every chapter, I feel like I got it. Dalibor and I got it correct because we had, the fine tuning and all this kind of stuff. So I feel like when you write an article, you write it as accurately as you understand and as you understand the facts to be, and the information from the various sources you're getting. This one, we like, I really feel like we got inside their heads, and we're able to share that. And so it's a very different way of doing journalism than what I grew
Hmm.
up doing,
Is there, as we kind of start to wrap things up here, is there anything else that you wanted to mention about the either book that maybe we didn't get the chance to cover?
Well, I just to generally plug AWA books for a second. I kind of feel like, just as a reader, as well
Yeah.
as a creator, the price points on these books are like 9.99. So it's priced to basically be accessible and to give you a chance to really, like, sample the stories they're doing, and they're just doing some amazing work across the board, like their series Hotel, the sort of horror series, and Casual Fling. I mean, there's just some amazing stories, and they're all like 9.99 each. And so, um, including this book, which Climate Crisis Chronicles. And so I just want it to be out there more. It's not just about, it's about more eyes seeing it and hopefully
Mhm.
getting engaged in the cause. And so, I like that they're doing that they're not making this prohibitively expensive or
Mhm.
or things like that. So yeah, so that's something that I'm very impressed with by the company.
Well, as we, would you like to give like one final pitch for the book and maybe where people can find you on, the social networks?
Yeah, so that is a good question where to find me. As of now, I'm still on Twitter. It's Ethan J. Sachs. And I'm also like around uh, on this new site called Hive, but right now it's apparently down, so I don't know if that's
Oh,
a
yeah.
good place.
As you can see, I made the switch over there too. I mean,
Yes, but
just
right
in
now it's
case.
down. Right now it's down, so
Yeah.
hopefully I'm still on there. I'm on Instagram. I don't Instagram enough, and I'm on
Yeah.
TikTok, and I need to do that more. So yes, I feel like I'm a little bit of a Luddite. My VCR clock is still blinking, but yeah. So anyway, Twitter for now is probably the best place. Ethan J. Sachs.
And then they can find the book at, they may order it from their local comic shop or
Yes.
from AWA or wherever
Yeah.
fine books are sold.
Exactly, exactly. But also plug for your local comic book store because they are the lifeblood of the industry.
Hmm.
And if you have a choice, it's always best to shop there.
Yep. All right. Well, I want to thank you for your taking the time to talk today. And again, it was great meeting you in person back at the show, and look forward to
Likewise.
meeting you again. And anybody watching can follow me on Hive at Comic Multiverse. I'm still on Twitter. I have my old Twitter. I used to write the website for the newspaper up here in Albany, New York. So my Twitter is still TU Comics blog. Um, I'm on TikTok as Multiverse or Comics Multiverse. I don't do it enough either. But and then if you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and follow us because I try to post a new video every week. And maybe next time you have a new book coming out, if you'd like to come back, then we'd be glad to have you.
That'd be great. Had a good time. Thank
All
you.
right. Well, thank you, and have enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.